All right, we're on Stephen Meade coming to you again from Davos Lodge, Monaco.
Hi, Stephen.
Super excited to have Jean with us. Thank you for making the walk all the way down here.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
Great time, great opportunity. I know that there's a lot of things that you guys are working on with the fun and the action. So rather than doing a big introduction, let's do the 2 or 3 things that you're most passionate about and working on right now, and then we can go deeper on those.
Okay, super. Yeah, and I'd love to ask you some questions too, because you're doing this super cool things around the green wave and environment, and yeah, so.
We'll have time when we have more time.
Okay. So I'm fortunate. My early career was in helping build mobile phone companies in different parts of the world, and then the last 20 years, we helped start up a foundation called Virgin Unite. We're the not-for-profit arm of the Virgin Group, but we're a little bit like an entrepreneurial incubator that challenges unacceptable systems and issues for good. So what we've been really focused on over the last 20 years is looking at how do we drive that systemic change. And so we've been bringing together groups of leaders. Like the first one we brought together was called the Elders, started by Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu and Kofi Annan. And that one was really around how do we change the way we look at conflict in the world and how do we bring peace and human rights. And then since then, we've created about 20 of these and incubated them and then spun them out. But the one I'm most excited about right now is called the Planetary Guardians. And like, when's the last time you had a health check, Stephen?
In December, because I wanted to get it done before this year started.
Well done. Can you imagine now if you could only have a health check every 7 years, and then when you got the results back, they were really bad? Yet that's exactly what we're doing to the planet right now. We're only taking her health check fully of the whole planet every 7 years. And it's a little bit like the planet's having an emergency, being rushed into the emergency room. There's hundreds of people who aren't doctors putting plasters all over the planet, but no one really focusing on the heart of the issues, no one understanding the root causes, not coordinating, not working together. And we need to quickly change that operating room scene. And one of the things that I'm super excited about is last September, these scientists, 28 scientists, had come up with something called the Planetary Boundaries Science, which takes a look at the whole planet. So not just climate change, not just biodiversity, but also water use, also looking at things like nitrogen, phosphorus runoff, land use. So it gives you a whole picture of the planet's health. And as you can imagine, when they came out with it, the results weren't great last September, and we're so near. It shows us that we're very near this tipping point, this red line, that if we cross it, the planet could go into catastrophic danger, and humanity would go into catastrophic danger. But the good news is that the scientists are still saying that we have 5 years left right now. So this planetary health check can serve as something that's a measurement framework, allow us to prioritize, and change that operating room scene, because it allows us to coordinate.
And so if you look at that from a diagnostic standpoint, which I love the concept of, is there a bigger opportunity for impact at the industrial level or consumer level? If you had mass consumers taking an adoption, which do you think would move the needle quicker, or is it not an either or, it's a both?
It's definitely a both and, because we need consumer, we need business, and we need government, and we need multilaterals. Our vision at this is how do we make it an operating and measurement framework for the world? So how do we put it at the center? So again, we're not thinking in silos of one part of the planet here, one part of the planet here, but we're thinking of that whole picture. Because, the last panel talked about health, and, we're living in this myth that we don't think that our health, human health, is connected to planetary health. It's ridiculous. And, if you look at just even on the novel entities boundary, which is the things that we are man-making and putting into the world, there's 70,000 man-made chemicals right now, and about 1% or less than 1% have been actually tested for human safety. And that's why we're seeing horrific things, like there was a study done in New Mexico that studied human brains, testicles, and also uteruses. And what they found is that 100% of them had microplastics in them, including placentas for new babies.
Yeah, the microplastics is a big issue, pollution. From the diagnostic standpoint, do you recall what the top 3 or 4 biggest contributors are, and what are some of the solutions you guys have seen that might be able to help with that?
Yeah, and if you look at all 9 boundaries in the diagnostic tool, what you'll see is that 7 of them are headed in the wrong direction, and 2 are headed in the right direction. I want to come back to the 2 in the right direction in a minute, because I think that's a massive story of hope for us. But some of the ones that are really dangerous that are heading in the wrong direction, there's obviously climate change is one of them, but also biodiversity loss. And those 2 link very closely with one another. And then there's also ones that are well breached right now, because 6 out of the 9 are breached, that we as human beings can actually, if we have a concerted effort, we can change and bring back into a safe operating space. Because one of them is nitrogen and phosphorus runoff, which is primarily from fertilizer. So if we change and go to nature-based fertilizer, so to your solutions, we have a ton of solutions for that. We have nano-based fertilizer, we have smart fertilizer management that can bring us back into that safe operating space. We're just not scaling. Or if you look at climate change, as you know, renewables are growing much faster right now than we had expected. So there's tons of solutions that will pull us back into that safe operating space. But I want to just talk about the story of hope too, because one of those boundaries, the ozone layer, was on a really dangerous precipice in 1974. 2 scientists showed really clearly that CFCs were destroying the ozone layer. And no one was listening to them in 1974, and they felt so passionate about this looming disaster that they published an article in Nature magazine, and they thought the entire world would react. And instead, the exact opposite happened. You had the $8 billion CFC industry attacking them, calling them Russian spies. You had professors pulling speaking engagements from them. But they kept on going. And by 1987, they had built this extraordinary collective of people from all kinds of diverse backgrounds, like Mustafa Tolba from Egypt, Stephen O. Anderson from America, who came together, and they got the whole world behind supporting the Montreal Protocol. And they came across divides, which is something I think doesn't happen very often today. They brought into the tent 2 very unlikely environmentalists, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And we would not have the Montreal Protocol if it wasn't for them. And we wouldn't be able to go out into the sunshine.
Interesting. There's a slide I used to do at the United Nations till they quit inviting me. It was called Awareness Builds Apathy, Actions Bring Achievements. And that's where I was most interested, is once you become aware of where these top-line issues are, and then you've broken them down into the actual, different characters, then you can attack it with solutions. And that's what it sounds like you're doing. What things are you most excited about that you've seen in terms of what you and the foundation and the actions are coming up in the next year to 5 years?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on about the apathy and breaking things down. I think that's what we don't do very well as human beings. We set these goals and these targets that we're never going to achieve.
Talk about it and we raise awareness and we don't have a solution to do anything.
Yeah, and then people get despondent because they're thinking, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to be able to deliver that. So they just stop, and it's too overwhelming for them. But that's why the boundaries are so interesting, because it does break it down into manageable things so that you can say, okay, how can we look at land use, which is a lot about agriculture, a lot, how do we shift that? How can we look at nitrogen and phosphorus? How can we look at biodiversity? So it shifts it. So I think for us right now, one of the things we're really excited about is to help build the action behind this. We build a whole collective around the world with these, what we're calling planetary guardians. So we have 20 incredible planetary guardians from all walks of life. So we have people like Paul Pullman from the business sector. We have people, Naoki Ishii from Japan, who's very focused on how do we change the financial system. We also have folks like Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, and we have President Santos, the former president of Colombia. But we also have scientists like Jane Goodall and Sylvia Earle. And then we have this amazing group of young activists. So we have Shia Bastida from Chile and Mexico, and Aisha Siddiqa from Pakistan, and Farwiza Farhana from Indonesia. And all of them are coming together across these differences to figure out how do we scale solutions. So some of the stuff I'm really excited about, like if we look in the finance sector right now, how do we use measurement frameworks? How do we use standards? How do we to really drive that change? How do we change regulatory environments? Because until we do those big systemic levers, then we're still going to be chugging down in this small scale.
Yeah, and we talk about that. They've standardized LEED and platinum in the US. You can build a building to sustainable standards. They don't have those same standards for product. They don't have those same standards for a smart city that may have things, or a deep sea port. So that standardization is what the finance industry and the philanthropy world sort of needs to get in. That I think is big systemic changes, which are great. I want to go back to what you're talking about. When you talk about stewards of the planet and kids and getting things involved, what sort of things are you seeing that consumers can actually do that if done in scale, 10 million people, things like that, what kind of things are you seeing where consumers can get actively involved and feel like they're making a difference with little changes?
I mean, I think the first thing is just our buying power, like where we purchase things, how much pressure we put. Because I think right now, if we really want to, again, we have a 5-year window. So if we want to make it within that 5 years, we need people to actually be putting pressure on their governments as well. We need people to be putting pressure on companies and not shopping from them if they're not taking a sustainable path. And we need them to stand up and call out the absurd. Like, why on earth are we still putting in our tax dollars right now over $1.8 trillion into environmentally harmful subsidies? It's absurd, and we don't talk about it. So I think we have to open up those conversations that are uncomfortable to look at how do we change it.
And I'm going to cross a bridge here because I think, obviously the CEO for you's done an amazing job of that kind of, leadership. When you talk about changing, Veet's here from Lieberland as well, doing a great job with the country. The countries can lead, but they have to change policy and framework and things like that. What are you guys trying to do at the country level? Because that's where a lot of the big industrial things happen, not necessarily the consumer. What's your movement and activity, and where do you think you can move the needle on that side?
Yeah, and I think to the country level, we also need companies to give the countries ground cover. Because if we want leaders to be really courageous, this is what they need to be right now, we need companies to stand up alongside them. Because otherwise, sometimes it's going to be difficult for them to make those decisions. Because what happens right now is we're all making short-term decisions based on election cycles. We are not thinking long term. And so I feel like with governments thinking about how do we embed this planetary boundary science into their budgeting process, into their risk frameworks, because of what we just saw unfold, the horrible tragedies in California. Countries and states and cities, they need to be thinking about what are the risks around all the planetary boundaries and what is the cost if we don't take action. And then we also need to be celebrating some of the successes that are happening as well. Like there's this amazing, we were just talking to Emmanuel from Congo, who's the head of Ringo National Park. And they've just announced, with the Congolese government, this amazing program, multi-million program to help create sustainable businesses across the Congo linked to protecting nature. Because one of the fundamental issues is that we don't value nature on the balance sheet. We build our wealth off the back of nature, but we don't put any value on nature. So how do we change that? But that can't be only governments. It has to be businesses working alongside them.
Right, and they're trying to do that with nature-linked bonds and things like that. And when you talk about tragedy, again, we're pointing to some people. My friend John Sutton's here in the back, who in Malibu just lost everything. So when climate change has a direct impact, it's a climate refugee. He came here straight from Moscow because he didn't have anywhere to go back to. So the real term impact is there. It's the long term. Let's wrap up with a few things. When you say 5 years, what do you mean by 5 years, and what do you think can be done in that amount of time?
So I think if we coordinate at the scale we need to, we can become unstoppable. Like if you look at the Montreal Protocol and what it put in place, they had people working industry by industry, looking at how they worked across competitive lines to come up with solutions beyond CFCs to make them happen. If we have that kind of concerted effort where we are putting the right incentive structures from the governments to the companies to act rather than just compete with one another, I feel like we can move the needle in a significant way. The 5 years right now, what they're worried about, we're seeing obviously ocean temperatures rise right now. We're seeing the hottest year on record last year. So what they're concerned about right now is if we don't start moving quickly, we'll start seeing tipping points, because what they're very clear on is those 9 boundaries don't work in isolation. So if one of them is tipping more, is breaching more, it could cause a tip in the other one. And then obviously the tipping points around the world that they don't really clearly understand yet. If Greenland ice sheet tips, what's going to happen? If the coral reefs tip, what is going to happen? So what they're concerned about in the 5 years is that some of those tipping points will start to happen that will make the breaching of the 9 boundaries worse. So that's why we need to act quickly on the priorities right now to make sure that we start pulling back into a green zone. And that won't happen. We will likely overshoot right now the 2 degrees. But we need to make sure that we bring it back, or else things, and I'm so sorry for your loss of your home and your family and everything that's happened. Because if we don't bring it back right now, we are going to see these tragedies unfolding at a scale that we can't even begin to imagine right now. And they're all connected. And that's the exciting opportunity about the boundaries as well, is that if you impact biodiversity and land use and nitrogen phosphorus runoff, you can also have a really much more significant impact on climate change. So if you do it all together rather than, again, working in silos. And the great thing is it's actually a better life on the other side. I mean, that's the thing that I think we miss all the time. We always think it's this false trade-off of we have to give up all of this to get this. And it's not true. It's not true at all.
So let's wrap up with this, Jean. Again, thank you so much. I know that this is super busy to get down here. If somebody wants to get involved, if they either want the research, the information, or want to get involved, whether it's an individual, corporation, or a government, is there a way to get in touch with you and the organization to do that?
Yeah, we would love to partner because we're building, ultimately we want this to be a mission control center for the planet so that we understand where we sit, we understand where our priorities are, and then we can use it as a coordinating framework. So anyone that's out there that wants to engage, we'd love for nations to work with us and start embedding the boundaries into their budgets. Be the first one. We're working with a number of nations around the world to embed chief planetary scientists at the most senior level of the government. So if any countries would like to explore that with us, we would love to explore that with them. And then we also want to work with companies because we built a tool with an organization called Systemic that allows you to use it as a decision-making framework. So say if you, like they did models in the dairy industry, in the steel industry, in the aviation industry. And so say if you're a dairy company and you want to look at moving your supply chain, you can then look at the impact on all 9 boundaries, but you can also look at the impact on your cost structure. So it allows you to have a tool that creates the best of both worlds for your bottom line and for the planet.
And so let's close with this. How do they get in touch with you or someone in the organization to get involved and get the information?
Yeah, if they go to the website Planetary Guardians, www.planetaryguardians, then they can just send a note to us and we'll reach out to them.
Perfect. All right, Jean, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks very much. And again, sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Wow. At least the applause will pick